Welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the Employee Benefits and HR session of the 2026 Not-for-Profit Update. In this session, we're going to address the evolving expectation of employees and what the nonprofit leaders are facing for retaining talent, managing hybrid or remote work environments, rising benefit costs, employee burnout, maintaining compliance with your state laws over your employees. So my name is Tanya Quigley. I am a partner here at Cerini Associates. I focus on, working with not-for-profit organizations and employee benefit plans. I have three experts here with me in the employee benefits and HR field, and I will have each one of the panelists introduce themselves. Jill?
Thank you, Tanya. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining Cerini Associates. Thank you for sponsoring this, and I'm looking forward to speaking with my co-panelists and discussing really where we are in terms of HR benefits and employment law in the midst of this year of 2026. And I think if we go back to what Ken has been talking about this morning, we're really talking about a shift in really what organizations look like relative to employee, hiring, retention, and so forth. Just for background, so I am the CEO and founder of Talent Management Solutions. We provide HR support and executive search for mostly nonprofit organizations. So I've been working with nonprofits for many, many years and have seen tremendous shifts and then also some consistency over the years. And we will talk about those today. So thank you for having me.
Ed?
Good morning, everyone. First off, thank you to Tanya for hosting this panel, and I'm happy to be here with my colleagues. And thank you to Cerini Associates for inviting us to be part of this today, this great event for nonprofits. So my name is Ed Probst. I'm one of the founding partners at Vanguard Benefits. We are an employee benefits consulting firm. We work with nonprofits, helping them design benefit strategies that help them attract and retain talent. We call those Hall of Fame employers. I have a unique lens, as for 26 plus years now, we've been working with employer groups on their benefit strategies and have had the lens of both the employee and the employer. So I'm happy to share some insights that we've seen over the years and what the trends are now, and answer any questions anyone has. So thanks for inviting me today.
Thank you, Ed. Doug?
Yeah, good morning. Thank you, Tanya, and thank Cerini and Associates for putting on this panel today. Doug Rowe, I'm a partner in the law firm Sir Tillman Ballin. I head the labor and employment practice group there. I represent both nonprofits and for-profit companies. And, I come from the perspective of avoiding the minefields, because there are so many traps for the unwary out there from an employment law standpoint, that it's important for employers, nonprofits, to be aware of what's out there, what they have to comply with, and the risks they are taking if they're not in compliance. Once again, Doug Rowe, and looking forward to today's panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Doug. I just want to remind everyone that if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the chat, and we'll try to address them as they come in. So I'll dive into our first question here. This is for all the panelists. It's regarding, the big picture shift, which we're seeing in 2026. So as we move through 2026, what's the biggest shift you're seeing in the nonprofit workforce, and what should leaders be paying attention to right now at this moment? Jill, would you like to answer that first?
Sure, thank you. I see the greatest shift is really around commitment to organizations and the feeling that employees have towards the organizations and the organization's commitment to them. And I think as a result of that, and result of the great amount of burnout and the stress on organizations. Organizations really need to look at how do they retain their employees. And so really what is, and Ken discussed this earlier, what's the consistency and the continuity of staff? And what is the pressure on the employer to find ways to really engage and assimilate and really create a commitment from organizations to remain, for employees to remain in organizations. So I think the shift is very heavily around you as employers looking at ways that you can, again, attract, retain, and really create developmental opportunities for your employees. I think that's really the greatest emphasis at this point.
Ed?
Yeah, so I think, one of the biggest shifts we've seen that's been happening is, for one, employees, candidates, especially the younger generation, they're much more astute than they were before. They have much more information, and more importantly, they know what they want. And so, we're seeing it's no longer that they are working with nonprofits just because of the mission. And don't get me wrong, the mission is critical to recruiting and retention. But employees are now looking for a total rewards approach, an approach that supports their lifestyle. And they want to work somewhere where they're asking the question, can I build a sustainable career while still making a difference, right? So it's multifaceted. And I think, three of the things they're looking for is well-being. They want an employer that supports their well-being. They want mental health support, flexibility, work-life balance. They want a place they can grow. So they want to see opportunity for the future, and they want financial security. What is their benefits costing them? What support do they have in the workplace to help them with college tuition, things of that nature that supports their work-life balance? And so I think it's important for nonprofits to measure engagement from their employees, listen to their employees. And again, just to go back to, mission might attract employees, but it's going to be things like culture and leadership and well-being that's going to keep them.
Doug?
Sure. Following up what Ed just said, how do you empower employees with respect to their engagement? And historically, many nonprofits would have a top-down management where the executives in the company would essentially be making most of the major decisions. And I think there's been a shift, or there's, at least I'm seeing with some clients, starting to see a shift in bottom-up management where the frontline employees are becoming empowered to make decisions. And that can certainly, help the organization as a whole because they're more connected to the local environment. And I think that it could result in, again, better employee engagement, and also, more relevant programs for the nonprofit itself. And I can't help myself but also mention that employers have to pay attention to compliance. I said it before, but Ed said something about the fact that the younger generation is more aware of what they can do and but I'm saying they're also more aware of their rights. And when it comes to employee rights, employers are going to have to be aware that there's the compliance is more key than ever, because every employee knows if they're being paid properly, if they're paying consistently with other employees, if they're properly classified as employees or independent contractors. I could go on and on, but that's just something that leaders have to pay attention to.
Great. So the next question is regarding talent attraction and retention of your employees. So nonprofits often can compete on salary. with the public sector. So what's actually working today when it comes to attracting and retaining talent? So Ed, this will go to you first.
Okay, thanks. So I'd like to challenge that perspective, or at least offer a different perspective on that. Nonprofits can't compete because salaries are they can't compete with salaries for profits. I think there's an opportunity now for nonprofits that is starting that didn't exist before, because I think even though compensation is always going to be vital to any salary agreement of arrangement, but I think it's rarely now the reason why people are choosing or the only reason why people are choosing their employer or staying with their employer. So I think that offers a unique opportunity for nonprofits to capitalize on the things other than salary that are making employees select their employers. And, again, I'll go back to that total rewards approach, or that entire employment experience. The employee wants to know that the employer is supporting their lifestyle. They want to know, do I feel valued at work? Do I have a voice at work? I think Doug mentioned that before, but like, does their opinion matter? Can they make an impact on decisions in the organization? Is there flexibility and understanding? I'll throw in a Knicks reference today because tonight's game one of the finals, right? But I was listening to Sports Talk Radio yesterday. I thought this was really cool. An employee of a company called in to the talk show and was talking about how their employer allowed them to change their schedule so they could get home in time to watch the Knicks game tonight. And it sounds very, very minor, but he went on for about 2 minutes talking about his employer, and then subsequently the talk show host talked about this employer for another 3 minutes, right? So small things like that, and having that kind of flexibility and understanding that was important to that employee can go a long way. Again, going back to can they grow professionally? Does leadership care about them as a person and support their lifestyle? It's all part of that whole process. So, I think, some of the things that employers want to do in order to make sure that they're supporting that is, employee recognition programs or leadership development, mentorships, things of that nature. And of course, the mental health and wellness benefits are vital to all of this.
Jill?
Yeah. In terms of what Ed is saying, and to say a little bit more about it, I think that even in the hiring process, in the recruiting process, potential employees are really looking for signals around how they will partake in decision making in an organization, how they will develop, what kind of programs will they be brought into, what kind of commitment is there to training. So when we look at total rewards, right, and we used to talk total rewards were salaries, and then it became the kind of the total package of compensation and benefits. And I think more and more employees are really looking for, what are the rewards? How am I going to reap benefits, right, in terms of my career in a much broader sense? How is this organization going to commit to me? And I think that's as equally important as the salary that they're getting. So employers are needing to look at that tremendously. And to Ed's point about training and mentorship and internships, and one of the things that was spoken about earlier today, Ken discussed really bringing people in and growing them in an organization. So that could be internships. It's really about sustainability. It's about building leadership capability. And all of those things really impact retention at this point.
Doug?
Also, on top of what Ed said, I think that making flexibility it's almost a core perk now, either with hybrid or remote work arrangements. Goes hand in hand with almost an employee benefit. Speaking of employee benefits, from a talent retention standpoint, I think if that nonprofits could look at creative benefits to attract and retain employees as well. Also, I think employees like to know, and they feel more appreciated if they know that they're being paid fairly. So, that goes to salary transparency and reporting, the salaries of others. And there's laws now in at least in New York and in many jurisdictions that require that require employers to post salary ranges when they're hiring employees. So there's almost a built-in salary transparency aspect that that employers should be aware of and take advantage of.
Thank you. Yes, there's a common theme here. I see that it's, culture within the nonprofit organization that is built by the leadership, open communication with your staff, always know that they're heard and that you know, they're wanting to be there, wanting to help, improve the organization, work with the organization and see themselves long term. The longer you are with an organization, the likely are you're going to stay there longer, and help grow and work with, staff that come in below you and give the opportunity to train them. So going into our next question, Jill, this is for you. Um, what does strong employee engagement look like for the balance of 2026 and into 2027, especially in our hybrid or remote work environments? And then, where are nonprofits possibly getting things wrong when it comes to that work arrangement?
Sure, sure. I think that it's so important that there be clarity around employees' positions, around how employees fit into the organization, what their role looks like relative to their colleagues, how departments interact. And so I think it really is important that employers from the very, very onset consider the value, what employees see as value, right? And there's a shift there, and it's been a shift that's happening slowly, but it's not happening slowly, right? And I think we're at a point where, while it's frustrating to employers, there really also needs to be the recognition and finding ways to create commitment from employees. And that really goes to the employer being accountable to the employee, just as the employee needs to be accountable to the employer. So I think it's much more of building a stronger relationship with greater understanding of what's available to employees and greater transparency, whether it's around salaries or other things.
So Ed, this question's for you. With rising costs and increase in employee expectations, how should nonprofits rethink their benefit strategy in 2026? And what benefits actually move the needle for retention and morale without breaking budgets?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that's vital is that the mindset has to shift from benefits being an expense to the organization and a challenging administrative, a necessary evil, if you will, to a tool or a resource that can help you attract and retain talents, right? Talent that is valuable to your workforce strategy. I would also say it's not necessarily the most important to have the most expensive benefits, but it's important to have benefits that matter, that are meaningful to the employees, and as I said before, that support lifestyles. So you want to have benefits that are solving problems in employees' lives, right? And that's the key to designing it in a way that would be attractive to employees. And for example, let's talk about health insurance for a moment, because it's the most expensive item that benefit that you're probably providing, and everyone's facing the same problem. Costs are going up, and cost share is going up for employees in most cases to accommodate for that, meaning deductibles and co-pays and things like that. So I think we still see in more situations than you would imagine that there's complacency, that there is a thought process of there's really nothing we can do about this, and that employers and nonprofits want to take the path of least resistance that makes it the easiest to administer. And I think you need to shift that mindset to think more strategically. And if you're thinking of it as this is going to help me attract and retain talent, it's going to make my employees more productive, which is going to help us with our mission, I think then you have a better viewpoint on this and can start to really look at benefits differently and more strategically. And so there are things that you can do, and it's not just lowering the cost for employees, although we all want to make sure try to put ourselves in a situation where we don't have to increase contributions, payroll contributions every year. But there are other things. If we're improving benefits, if we're at least leaving benefits the same way as they were the year before, that goes a long way in the view of an employee, because now we're in a pattern where we're used to looking at increases in contributions and increases in employee cost share. And there are definitely things you can do as an employer. One thing we've been doing with, for organizations that are larger, have more than 100 employees, we've been doing a lot more self-funded strategies, and our self-funded clients tend to at least deliver the same benefits every year. Sometimes costs go up, and there does have to be premium contribution adjustments, but at the very least, we're addressing one of the two issues, which is we're delivering the same benefits or better benefits than you had the year before. For smaller organizations, I would recommend looking at things like the difference card, where we're delivering strategies for our clients right now that are keeping the cost the same, and at the same time next year, at the same time on the renewal, that we're creating a strategy where employees pay nothing for their out-of-pocket costs in certain situations. So there are strategic, they are a little bit more administratively burdensome, let's call it. Not a great deal, but they do require more work and more thought and more planning. But at the end of the day, if it's creating a strategy that is helping you attract and retain talent, if you look at it from that perspective, I think the work is minimal compared to the benefit.
Yeah, I agree. It's something that your nonprofit leaders need to, focus on, revisit each year, because, your staffing changes year over year, and, listening to the employees to see what benefits are most beneficial for them. Whether it's, again, outside of insurance, but like enhanced paid time off, wellness support, mental health resources. So there's a lot of options that nonprofits can do that are valuable to the employees that they see. Okay, so this next question is for you, Doug. What are the biggest employment law or compliance risks nonprofits should be thinking about in 2026, especially with hybrid and evolving workplace expectations?
When it comes to hybrid work situations, it's one thing about building a program or policy into your organization. It's another thing about honoring requests for a reasonable accommodation if an employee believes that he or she needs to work from home for some time because of a disability. So, when it comes to just creating a policy, if the employer will permit employees to work from home, they have to remember that the employee's home is the workplace. So the employer has to remember that if they're dealing with a non-exempt employee, they still have to track the hours that the employee is working from home, because the employee is entitled to be paid for every hour they're working, even if they're working from home. And the employer should set a schedule for the employee. If it's 9 to 5, that's the employee's hours. The employee shouldn't be permitted to, send emails at 2 a.m. just because they were up and thinking about something, because that creates exposure to the employer to have to pay additional compensation for employees where they know that employees are working beyond their regularly scheduled hours. Again, all the employment laws apply to working from home, the discrimination laws, the sexual harassment laws, and when it comes to employees working from home, supervisors should be trained to understand what the employees are required to do. There's technology out there where employers are able to track the employees' work. They might want to consider that when they're permitting employees to work from home. We've been involved, and now let me shift over to the request for a reasonable accommodation, working from home as that type of request. An employer can't have a policy that doesn't permit employees to work from home, especially where the employee is requesting that as a reasonable accommodation to a disability. If there is a request for a reasonable accommodation due to a disability, the employer is obligated to engage in the interactive process with the employee. How long will the accommodation last? Will the employee be able to perform the essential functions of the job while working from home? And is there some other accommodation that can be granted, which doesn't have the same impact on the employer? So employer, it's a tricky area. Employers have to remember that, that a request for a reasonable accommodation due to a disability has to be viewed under the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act and perhaps state laws, and it needs to be addressed. There's also a patchwork of state leave laws out there. Aside from the disability discrimination laws, there's paid family leave laws in New York, for example. There's bonding leave laws for employees to take care of their child after childbirth. So again, employers have to be aware of all of the patchwork of leave laws in order to ensure compliance with all of them. I touched upon misclassification, and this is an issue that's near and dear to me, to my heart, because we regularly litigate these issues or get involved in Department of Labor audits on these issues. So, you have classifications. You have employer versus employee relationship. You have an independent contractor employer relationship. And then you have volunteers. But by way of example, if you have a volunteer who you start treating as an employee, that volunteer, you could inadvertently convert that volunteer into an employee who would be entitled to wages. We had that precise issue several years ago. We represented a nonprofit, and the volunteer, we asked if he could start driving a bus and driving some of our people in the organization to certain locations, and he drove on a regular basis, and it almost became part of his duties. So nonprofits should be aware of how they treat employees, because they could inadvertently create exposure to them. Be careful also of classifying somebody as an independent contractor when they're actually an employee. If they look like an employee and smell like they're like an employee, they're an employee. So you can't call them an independent contractor. Even if they sign a contract that says, I am an independent contractor, the courts or the agencies will view that, will actually ignore the agreement, and they'll look at the nature of the relationship, the substance over the form, and they'll determine on their own whether this is properly classified as an independent contractor or misclassified. And if there's a misclassification, just so you're aware, then the employee, then the independent contractor could be entitled to unpaid overtime, discrimination coverage, etc. So it's important. The other thing is when it comes to properly paying their employees, they have to pay. If they're employees, they have to be paid overtime if they're non-exempt and they work more than 40 hours in a week. In New York and some other states, there's also a salary threshold, so they have to be paid at least a minimum amount in order to remain exempt. And if they're paid less than the threshold amount, then they're entitled to overtime anyway, even if they are deemed to be an exempt employee. Track hours of the employees, as I said before. Remember that employees are entitled to meal periods. It's just important to comply with the wage and hour laws. The other advice I always give, and I've heard this from many employers, is I don't terminate an employee without consulting with my employment lawyer. There's just too many risks out there. And just a business tip when it comes to employment law compliance, there's an insurance policy out there called Employment Practices Liability Insurance, and it would be in nonprofits' best interest to have that kind of insurance coverage.
Thank you, Doug. That's a lot of information, and just reevaluating your volunteers and independent contractors to make sure they're properly classified. So this next question's for all the panelists. What's actually working right now to address burnout and improve retention in nonprofits, and where the organizations may be missing the mark? Jill, you can respond, please.
I think there's a tremendous focus on the investment in technology and also the defining of what AI is going to be within an organization. So what is an organization's AI policies? Where is it encouraged that AI be used, and where is the value? So I think that reducing burnout includes having technology that supports some of the administrative challenges and the administrative workloads, and also understanding where AI in the realm of technology can really support the organization to lighten the load without employees feeling threatened. And I think the other thing, and I mentioned it before, is that as it relates to burnout and retention, I think that utilizing in a very legal way, utilizing interns, utilizing training programs, having people come in that learn the organization, that support the employees, can be tremendous in terms of helping those existing employees with their workload. And again, you are never giving an intern the work that you're giving an employee, and Doug speaks about that often. There's really a difference, and there needs to be that differentiation. But there are creative ways of offloading certain things. That's an experience for an intern, and also will help the employer and the employee specifically. And so I think those are important things to look at as we move forward in terms of supporting employees.
Thank you, Jill. Ed?
So I think just first and foremost, recognizing that burnout is a real thing and understanding the impact that it has on productivity, understanding what it looks like. Right? I think that some organizations don't have a good grip on what burnout actually looks like. And, in the nonprofit sector, it could be even more so because there's a lot of passion, as we all know. There's a lot of passionate people who are very smart and very engaged in their mission, but that doesn't sometimes that doesn't compensate for exhaustion. So you could get people could be very sold out to a mission and doing work that is, very needed and necessary work. But is that, is there any regulation there? Is there anything that is stopping you from getting exhausted? Because it's like, just like anything in a for-profit sector, the nonprofit sector can deal with exhaustion and burnout as well. So I would say, like, coming with an approach, very generally speaking, of the people support the mission, and if the people, if we support the people, the mission gets supported, right? But specifically, I think training managers. We have clients that bring in outsourced organizations to come in and train managers to understand what burnout looks like from the top down, and then surveying employees, talking to employees, finding out, how are you feeling? Having managers understand that, constantly checking in with them to make sure that, especially, it can even happen when you're working from home, right? Because some people work more when they're at home. They never turn off, right? They're constantly working because they can come back and forth, and they don't get that break, that, where, okay, work time's over. So I think it's even important for your remote employees to check in, recognizing, then the things we've talked about already, but like recognition, celebrating employees, making sure that they feel valued in the workplace. But I think the communication key is very important, and having that two-way communication with an employee to limit the burnout.
Thank you, Ed. Doug?
I think that Jill and Ed said it all, but I'll sort of say it a little differently. I mentioned before about working hybrid and remote work schedules, but to have true workplace flexibility, I think, is crucial to avoiding burnout. And also, with respect to something Jill said, it's AI is here, and a company should be aware that some of their duties that are performed on a day-to-day basis can now be performed through AI, and that will save time, and that will enable the organization to focus more on the cultural shifts and the mission of the organization, as opposed to getting involved in the detail, such as hiring. I mean, and recruiting. AI can serve as a significant purpose in that regard and save the organization a lot of time. Also, companies have many different softwares in their organization, so to consolidate software will also save the organization time and money and effort.
Thanks, Doug. So we have about 5 minutes left in our session. I'll try to get through these questions, or skip some to get to the end. Where do you see nonprofits struggling most to align culture, benefits, and compliance, and what does getting it actually look like, Ed?
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. I think that sometimes it's very siloed, so that you're only talking about compliance when there's a deadline, or you're only thinking about benefits when it relates to cost, and you're not focusing on the employee experience. I think when your culture reflects your values, and your benefits support your workforce, and your policy compliance practices create trust. I think trust is the big word. When you do that, that more integrated approach, I think they're more aligned.
Doug?
As I mentioned before, nonprofits often blur the lines between paid staff and volunteers or independent contractors, and that creates a potential significant liability. We see it every week. We have another issue in that regard, and I think that nonprofits are still missing the mark there.
Thank you. Jill?
Yeah, I think it's important for organizations to try to, regardless of the huge pressure that there is, to try to slow down and look at what does really best practice look like, right? How do we create an organization where there's mutual respect, where we feel like we're getting from the employee what we need, but that we are also giving the employee what they need? And so surveys, assessments, looking at really what is going to elevate the organization in terms of a great place to work. Ed and I talk a lot about, and he's done programs in terms of promoting kind of great places to work, and he acknowledges, and we all try to acknowledge those organizations that are getting it. And sometimes it's sitting back and doing reading and talking to your colleagues, talking to other executive directors, and really hearing what they're doing and just the little nuances that are making a difference. I think we, as professionals, talk a lot about these things over the years, and they still continue to be extremely important. And the communication and the transparency with employees is just so key to having a healthy organization. So I think all of those things are really very important.
Thank you, Jill. The next question is staff satisfaction and communication. I feel like we've kind of touched upon that, with previous questions. So with the time we have, I'll just go to the last two questions. If a nonprofit leader could change one thing tomorrow to improve their workplace, what would you recommend? And Jill, I'll start with you.
I would recommend spending time thinking about and creating developmental opportunities at every level in your organization. Developmental opportunities and letting employees know that that's important to you, to the organization, to the health of the organization, and that you really care about the investment that you make in your employees. I think that's critical and goes a long way in terms of hiring and retention and culture.
Of course. Thank you. Ed?
Well, I'll take it back to the benefits lens. I'll just say communication. And I know we talked about communication, but specifically, not only just checking in with your employees and talking to them all the time, but specifically when it comes to benefits, we see that one time of year that you are educating your employees on the benefits they have through your organization is not enough. Open enrollment, employees have lives, they have things going on. The last thing that they're thinking about is their employee benefits when they leave the organization. So I think more frequent education in varying formats, virtual meetings, lunch and learns, open enrollment, things to educate the employees on every benefit, not just the insurance type benefits, but every benefit that your organization offers. I think it should be in their face at all times.
Thank you. Doug?
They said it, but I'll say it again. A strong work culture and high employee retention go hand in hand. So I just think that that's what the nonprofits need to focus on. Also, I touched upon salary transparency before. I think that goes a long way for employee engagement.
Thank you, Doug. So we're at the time now where the session's coming to an end. I want to thank our panelists for their insight and their knowledge to give to our attendees. It's very helpful and will definitely be carried, for us to use from this year and into 2027. So I want to thank you all for being here. It's much appreciated.